It is Monday, September the 21st, 2020. It's a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And this will be the Kerr County Court is now in session, and this is a 2 o'clock.
A lot
I stand correct. 2 o'clock. Stand correct. I was thinking about something else. But this is a workshop on the subdivision rules and regulations. And we have an agenda, and it looks like we start with the overall process. And is Charlie going to guide us through this, or?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I mean, I didn't know if Commissioner Letts or you or how we were going to do this. I'm fine with the agenda, just.
Charlie and I kind of worked on the agenda together.
Okay.
That I wrote it.
Okay, y'all can do a tag team.
Okay. Well, the process started in 2019, and we had several workshops then. We went through a red line version of the subdivision regulations. There were a few comments. Most everything had been accepted. There were a few things that needed to still be addressed, and one of them at that time was that legislation had just passed some new laws about platting and how long that the county or any entity has to review a plat, and that the court was either to, once a plat had been turned in and there was nothing wrong with it, that the court had 30 days to either accept, to approve with conditions, or to deny. And that's the big one. We wanted to make sure that our regulations comported with that. And one of the things that had also been removed was preliminary plats. If we require a preliminary plat in 2020, we're violating state law. It's no longer a requirement. So there's still some benefits to a subdivider doing a preliminary plat. And so I redid the regulations to make that optional. Also looked through the regulations to make sure that I understood when things were due. And we thought that we might need to change the manufactured housing regulations to comport with the 30-day regulation, because it has a 60-day, but those are two completely separate, as we all very well know now from a couple of months ago, that the manufactured housing rental community rules are completely separate from the platting rules, and it states, don't look at the platting rules when you're looking at manufactured housing. So we do anticipate, or what I'd like to do at some point, I don't know, Jonathan, when that's the history there.
Well, let's go on the history a little bit more of what we're going to be doing. This workshop, another one is set for Wednesday. May or may not need it, depends how this one goes. Then I would recommend that we send these rules to Chuck Kimbrough, let him look at it, give him several weeks or a month to go through it, because it's a pretty big document. And at that time, either during that time or immediately after that, if there's no major changes, start the process for a TIA, a takings impact assessment, which means that basically we put it out to the public. We're getting ready to do these rules and make sure that there's no takings under federal law, or any state law, federal law primarily, involved in this. And it's a kind of a one time to go through it.
And just to clarify, when you use the word takings, because the public may not be familiar with that word, that's what we lawyers refer to as inverse condemnation, where you're taking people's property without due process and fair compensation.
Right. So, and because our rules have a lot of regulations related to property, we need to make sure that our rules are not taking, or deemed as taking. And then after that, we would have there'll be a public hearing as part of that process. And then after all that's done, we'll probably have another public hearing on the subdivision rules, and then final adoption. Okay. So that's kind of where we're going for the next, probably, and I'm guessing it's going to take, if no major changes today or Wednesday, I would suspect we have 4 months to go.
Yeah, end of the year.
Well, you said, Charlie, that we don't have preliminary platting. There's an awful lot in here about it.
Yes.
Not be required.
Yeah, it's optional though.
So that would scare me off from it, just having to read all that.
You don't have to do it.
Okay.
A lot of developers like to do that.
Huh?
Because they want to work with you. Some developers like to work with you that way, so you develop the plan as you actually go through it.
I think it will make the reason you would want to do preliminary platting when Charlie gets to his checklist. And I think that it helps a lot.
Well, just look at the people in the room, our professionals that are interested in what we're doing. We work together, and we work pretty well together. And preliminary plat is something that, if you choose, we can work with you to help you get your plan the way that you and your client want it.
Sure.
And it doesn't make much sense to do preliminary plat on, say, a 10-lot subdivision. But if you're doing a 200-lot, multiple phase subdivision, it makes all kinds of sense to come in with a preliminary plat that shows all of the different phases, and then you come in with final plats on phase 1 and final plat on phase 2. Now you've got a document that the court approved 4 years ago, and every year they renew it to keep it going so that they can continue with that development. That's really where the preliminary plat is very powerful and would be something that I would see a developer would want to do that. It does have the ability to lock certain things in.
State law will give us the option of whether we want to do the preliminary plat or not?
Sure. Yes.
It's optional.
No, we just can't require it.
Pardon me?
We cannot require
Right,
it.
but
It's
we
not
can
Or
do
we
it.
can require it, but it's basically meaningless.
But if my client would like to go through the preliminary plat, okay, that's good. I like that.
And there's one thing you said a minute ago, Charlie, it was about the change in the legislature. You have 30 days
Yes, sir.
unless there's a problem with it.
Right.
The way I read that, you have 30 days to review it or it goes into effect.
You've also got 30 days to
You have
review
30 days
it.
and then you're stuck with the problem, whatever it may be.
That's right.
Okay.
If you
Just
don't
wanna
take any
clarify.
action,
Right.
inaction is action.
Exactly. So to say that it gets filed and 30 days later without any kind of a problem in it, it goes into effect. It goes into effect unless we find a problem with it.
Right.
Okay. Just to clarify, that's all.
That's true.
Okay.
Okay. Your favorite topic in your checklist?
Okay. So put a checklist together of the, essentially it takes the entire subdivision regulations, about 66 pages, and puts it on 7.
Let me go back and look at what you were saying, Chris.
Single spaced.
And that's why he created this checklist. You have to be very specific if you have a problem with something that's submitted as a plat.
Right.
You can't just say, well, I don't like the drainage. You have to cite the specific area of our subdivision that you're not in compliance with section law, whatever. Charlie realized that to do that, he needed basically a very detailed checklist so he can go through and he can check that you're not in compliance with this, check it and give this back to the people.
Sure, that's great.
And it also serves as a good way to just review any subdivision. It has multiple purposes.
Right. Right. So the checklist, you're seeing the left side of the checklist, which is in layman's term. There's a right side of the checklist. It's a spreadsheet, and it's actual verbiage straight out of the subdivision regulations, been copied and pasted word for word. So if I do send comments back to a developer surveyor, they're getting the actual word for word straight out of the regulation book. It's not my layman's term.
So will that be available once approved on the website?
Yes, that's ultimately what I'd like to do
Okay.
with it, is to make it available to the developers
Sure,
and
okay.
their surveyors. I think it'd be a very useful tool to them. It's kind of been in beta mode, but it also is keeping us within state law, which says if I make a comment, I've got to be able to state where that's coming from. So that avoids the ambiguous comments that I think that some folks have experienced. So, I don't know if y'all have any questions about the checklist so far. Again, these are all in layman's terms, but we have a set of general provisions at the beginning of our subdivision regulations, which also goes through a list of exemptions from platting. Then you go on past that. I think chapter 2 of the whole subdivision regulations is just definitions. I don't have that in here.
Let's go back to general provisions.
Okay.
On the 1.03, about the exemptions, we need to clearly say that those do not apply to revision of plat. We have so many questions about that. That's only for, those exemptions are only for unplatted property. Once it's a platted property, those exemptions no longer exist.
Which one are you talking about?
1.03.
So that is,
Section.
1.04 does that. So 1.004 says
What if
revision
you-
of plat is subject to these rules, except exemptions listed in 103 and
Let's make some
6.04C.
copies for these guys to look at, because we're spitting out stuff, and is that, can we do that?
Jody, is that something?
Of just the checklist or?
Yes.
I mean,
I'm gonna be going through the actual subdivision rules, so those are real fine.
Well, there's, we're
Yeah, the
we're
check-
looking at this,
Okay.
and they're in here, and they want to be in here, so I think it'd be advantageous if they had it.
But 104.
104 does that, okay.
Yes, sir, it does that.
And what about the model subdivision rules or small residential? You and I had a conversation the other day, and I thought, you told me that you think that they're exempt from these exemptions.
They are.
Should we say that under 1.04 as well? So it's just really clear up front?
What was your other example?
Say that again.
John?
If you're under the, we used to call them the model subdivision rules, which is any lot less than 5 acres come under a bunch of additional requirements.
Yes.
None of these exemptions apply to those. So if you're going with a, small lots, those exemptions do not apply. It's taken us to, this isn't new, it's that we're actually beginning to understand how to really, how to implement, those lots or the rules for smaller subdivisions, smaller lot size subdivisions. They can be big subdivisions.
So where I think that's already addressed is actually 5.01G.
I know it's addressed later, I'm just saying, should we put it here at the same time?
Okay.
Just move the location.
Just leave it in both places. Because people look at this and they think, okay, we're exempt, and they never get to section 5. I want it up front, and we probably should put that in front of 1.03. Because when people are reading through it, I don't want them to get the idea they can just,
Gotcha.
oh, we're exempt, we don't need to do this. I apologize to everyone, I
Nope.
talk about these numbers pretty quick, I read this thing. I've read it a lot, so I assume the others are.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Oh, we'll come in one more sheet.
Thank you, ma'am.
Do you want me to make copies of the 66-page doc? I mean, I can do, it's just gonna take a while.
I think we'll be pretty far along by that point.
So no? Or the appendix, anything else?
I think that this gives them a guide they can go through what we're talking about.
Charlie, can I ask a question while we're on? I got a copy now. That 1.03B,
Yes, sir.
that's a family partition, is that correct? That's what that's saying?
Yes, that's the
Do
family
those not
partition.
have to be 5 acres or greater? In other words, if they're less than 5 acres, they're not exempted, are they?
Yes.
You're correct.
hey, Charlie, repeat the question, because people have listened to YouTube, can't hear it. Somebody.
His
knows.
question is, in section, one of the exemptions, 1.03B, has to do with family division of property, but the model subdivision regulations are not subject to the exemptions, and model subdivision regulations are any residential division of property that creates 2 or more lots that are 5 acres or less.
Okay.
So if I had 9 acres and I wanted to give 4 to my son, then I would have 5 for myself and 4 for my son. I just created that scenario of 2 lots, 5 acres and 4 acres, 2 lots that were 5 acres or less, so it's still subject to the plating regulations.
Okay.
That's the point that he's making.
Can
And-
you maybe add a note that says greater than 5 acres? Like that in .103B?
Well, this is just your layman's terms.
It is, this is layman's terms, you're correct, but I think that,
Is it covered?
I think that what Commissioner Les was suggesting covers what you're saying.
Okay.
And I think if we're gonna put the model subdivision regulations or not, and I'm using that term, even though we're not gonna call it that anymore, but that it needs to go before 1.03, well, we probably need to take that revision of plat and also stick that before 103, so that they know those are the 2 areas that are not subject to the exemptions.
I like
If
it.
you're doing a revision of plat, or if you're subject to the model subdivision regulations, you still have to plat.
Yes. Okay.
Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you.
Go to the next question. This checklist is simply just for you to let us know what's wrong, not something for us to follow.
I think it'd be good if you could follow it too, and maybe you missed it at the beginning, but the intent is to publish this at some point, to be used as a tool by everybody. We're all on the same page.
Right, but to say, like, if I'm planning something some way, and it doesn't include all these other provisions and other sections, I won't be able to follow that just for what I'm doing, right? Your checklist.
This checklist is all inclusive, it's the entire
Yeah, it just has
subdivision
everything,
regulations.
we have to figure out what all we do.
I think what this helps you do is to gloss over the entire subdivision regulations, which is 66 pages in 7 pages.
Right.
And so, if you can spend, an hour on your subdivision, go, okay, what am I subject to? Should be able to go through this within an hour's time as opposed to hours and days and weeks. Yes, sir.
Just make sure I understood that.
Mhm.
Good point.
You bet. And then we always have concept plan meetings that we can set up with any developer, anyone who calls and says, I'd like a concept plan. I just want to make sure before I jump off here and get my feet wet that I'm going down the right path and thinking this through straight.
So the scenario is concept plan, preliminary plan, if so chosen, and then plan.
Yes,
And
sir.
the-
And the concept plan is also optional, because it
Right,
can be
right.
viewed as a preliminary
Right.
plat. So
Okay.
both of those are optional.
Right.
Concept is highly recommended. Preliminary plat, highly recommended if you have a big development.
Okay.
Otherwise, it may be a waste of time. But the concept plans, that's the easiest one there is. You can literally come in with just a sketch on a piece of paper or a napkin and a short checklist that gets you going, and we can go through all the scenarios. And you're with your commissioner of your precinct will be in that room. And we usually have headwaters there and environmental health, and we kind of get the whole development group there.
Getting everybody in the same room at the same time helps.
Yes, it does. Okay. Chapter 2 is not on here because it's a list of definitions. So if you need a list of definitions, you would have to go back to the subdivision regulations. Chapter 3 talks about enforcement. If somebody doesn't follow the subdivision regulations, what state law says could happen and how that gets remedied. Chapter 4 is variances.
Excuse me, Charlie.
Yes, sir.
Go to chapter 4. Can you explain what 3.08 might be?
Those are the penalties set forth, and well, these are my layman's terms, so I'm just going to read it to you. Those are the penalties set forth in section 232 of the local government code.
Do you know what the penalties are?
I would have to go back and read them.
I'm just curious. The reason I ask that, we have scenarios where Eric, Don, and myself will have people come in and we'll talk about their property being surveyed and the need for a subdivision plat. And those people say, okay, fine, we'll get back with you, and they leave. knowing they have to go by these rules, and then they'll hire somebody from San Antonio to come in that's not familiar with these rules,
Right.
and they will do it, whatever they want, without filing a subdivision plan. My question is, what are the ramifications if somebody does that? Are they just not gonna be able to get permits, or are there some fees, some financial penalties involved? Some fines, I'm sorry.
Right.
That type of, penalty.
Yeah, well, there's, you know, we can kind of go through what those penalties would be. Let's see.
And that, by the way, I'm afraid
The-
is happening on a regular basis.
Things that could happen, 3.03A, the county attorney could file an action in court to enjoin the violation of a regulatory requirement or recover damages in the amount adequate to bring about compliance. So that could happen if you're subdividing and not following the regulations. 303B, the offense committed if the person knowingly or intentionally violates established requirements. If the offense is a Class B misdemeanor. Let's see, 303C, the county attorney may file an action to enforce any other enforcement permitted under state or federal law. 3.04, the court may pass a resolution of noncompliance that would be filed by the county clerk for existing subdivisions where a final plat has not been approved or recorded, or it's substandard. 3.05, these provisions shall not apply to any recorded subdivisions or lot therein which were approved and recorded or had a preliminary plat approval prior to the acceptance of these regulations. Again, maybe another reason why someone might want to do a preliminary plat.
That's fine.
That's about it, but 3.08, I'll read it directly. It says the penalties or enforcement for noncompliance are set forth in section 232 of the local government code. So really, it's a reference back to 232, and we would really need to go to that directly to read that. But I believe some of the things I just read came from 232.
And in practice, you're exactly correctly that there are illegal subdivisions, and what we end up doing is catching it usually through septic permits at some point, and we make them comply. And the problem of, as you know this, going back to enforcement, is that a lot of times the people that do that are 2 or 3 transactions down the road, and it's very difficult to the person that did the illegal act or illegal subdivision is no longer around. So, but it's a problem.
And we're trying to get around it. I mean, we're trying to stop it, so as long as y'all are aware, we try.
Right.
Thank you, Charlie.
You bet. Chapter 4 is variances. I think I just pretty much copied and pasted that. It was pretty straightforward, didn't need layman's terms. But there is a process for requesting variances. Then we get on to chapter 5, which is really the meat and potatoes of a subdivision plan review. And that walks you through provisions for future subdivisions that in general, not having reserve strips, those are prohibited. I think we all know that one pretty well.
We need to probably look at expanding that one. And we're really having maybe Chuck Kimbrough really look at that one, because that one's been subject to litigation in the past.
These reserve strips?
Yes.
Oh, that's the burning wall.
Forgive me
I
for
remember now.
skipping around, but stop me if there's a comment that needs to be made somewhere. If we move on after the general provisions for subdivisions, right after that is residential subdivisions, which create 2 or more lots of 5 acres or less. And that's also known as the model subdivision regulations that the court adopted from the Texas Water Development Board years ago, 2007, I believe.
Charlie, let's go back a little bit. And I'm not going to go over right now. I think there's a few things that need to be moved around a little bit, but you and I can get together on that. It's not changing the verbiage. But if you go to the water, community water system and public water system lot size.
Where's that?
Page 16. And you have it underlined.
Oh, yes, yes.
I'm still concerned about the language there, and I think, to me, the intent should be, I'm not sure how we get there, but if you have a central sewer system, central water system, the lot size, the minimum lot size is fine, half an acre, but the number of lots that are available, and the water availability part of it should be dictated by TCEQ and Headwaters based on the water availability that water utility has. And if I read the underlined portion, if I'm misreading it, you take a 2 acre, and we have a half acre lot size, but we have a 4 acre lot, you divide it by 2, you get 2 lots out of 4 acres. Well, that's defeating the whole purpose.
Right.
We want to be able to have 4 acres and go to 8
4
lots.
lots.
We want to go to 8 lots, like in Center Point, as long as it's within the rules of Headwaters, TCEQ, and the water utility. I think we need to get a letter to that effect. And I'm not sure how we get that in here, but that's where I think we need to be going, because the whole purpose of one of the purposes of the sewer project
right,
was to allow for these higher density areas to develop, and you might be able to do it on a large tract, divided by 2, like 100 acres divided by 2, you get 50 lots, and you may be able to have some, put in roads and parks and stuff like that, you might do it, but on something that owns 2 or 3 acres, they're stuck. They can't do anything. They can do, if you have a 4 acre tract, you can do a half acre lot and a 3.5 acre lot, and that's not where we want to be.
Jonathan, I'm going to page 16, I think, is that under section D? Is that what you're
Yes,
referring to?
Yes.
Yes.
Because the one I've got, and maybe this one has been updated, it's total number of acres divided by 1.5, which in your scenario would give us, a 4 acre tract would give you 8 lots.
Right.
Right.
And we discussed that in October of last year, or August, September, I don't remember what month it was. But then when we visited with Headwaters, they said, time out, we've only got enough water available for an average of 2 acres countywide.
Right.
So
But that's countywide.
that, and our regulations before we touched that did have that number 2 in it, where you divide the total acres by 2. And that's the way the regulations are right now as they stand, divided by 2. So I underlined it in here on purpose that we needed to discuss this and have more discussion. Where are we going to land ultimately? Do we want to stick with 2 and be safe? Do we want to go out on a limb and say 1/2, but there's some proving up that the developer has to do on an engineering basis to prove that they've got the water? How do we handle this, and how does this get rewritten?
I think it needs to have the option in there, if there's water availability, then that's got to be considered rather than some random number of size of the lots depending on the numerator that you
Well, if you
choose.
say it's
The denominator.
subject to water availability, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So that is an equation that Headwaters has, but it's not necessarily what Aqua Source or somebody's going to tell you that they have. And I'm not picking on them, but whoever the providers, they're going to try to get enough water to satisfy the need of all the customers. So I don't know that there's a magic number for that.
Well, I look at it as these water utilities in these situations, and granted they're not governed like this, but the city of Kerrville gets X acre feet of water based on the city limits of Kerrville. They get, that's, and Headwaters then calculate some kind of a maximum, and you take the golf courses and all this other property and parks into account. I don't know why we can't do that, and that's basically what Camden County WCID does. I don't know why we can't do the same thing with these utilities, that put the burden on them to prove to Headwaters that they have the water.
Correct.
Because under their CCN from TCEQ, they have to either supply water to a lot, or they have to release it from the CCN, as I understand.
We don't have any regulating authority for that.
But TCEQ does.
TCEQ,
And I wanna
so we'd
get-
have to ask their permission. We can't.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. We let,
Let them
not,
decide.
we don't make the decision. It's between Headwaters and TCEQ if there's enough water.
Right.
They, the Headwaters has expressed some concern over this, as you know.
But I'm trying to figure out how we go into, and Center Point's is the example. Because you take, property on, on 480, there's some fields, you get near the
Right.
cemetery over there, there's some big fields over there. Well, it would be, if they want to, they should be able, when they have sewer, they have water, they should be able to develop that on half-acre lots if they choose. And our rules don't let them.
Right. Yeah, there is a concept for a subdivision like that, that it's greatly restricted.
So, I'm not sure exactly how we do it, but I don't think this 2-acre works.
Well, what we're looking for is acceptable lots, okay, that has sufficient water and sufficient sewer capability, okay, to do it. So why should we arbitrarily use some factor to determine the size of the lot?
Well,
There should be some minimum, but it shouldn't be
Well,
something
minimum-
that's driven by water availability based on some guideline for the county.
But Headwaters
it has to be.
Headwaters
Well, yeah.
will grant every utility in the county a maximum allowable, for lack of a better word, it's probably not the correct word. And if they get into a situation and they have drought contingency plans, and they will cut back accordingly. So I don't know why we don't put it up to a water utility to provide it with the infrastructure.
I think we actually do have a built-in, I think we can leave this language alone, and here's the reason why. We follow this up by stating that if you meet this table, and you meet all these requirements, you have satisfied our water availability requirements. If we're talking about taking 4 acres and divided it into 8 lots, you're under the model subdivision regulations now. Well, that has its own guidelines for water availability. And so there, and it says what you've got to do. And if you can get, if there's an existing water provider there, say in Aqua, Texas, and they fill out that Appendix M or something similar, there's 2 main things that have to be in their letter that comes back. They need to be able to state that the developer has paid for all the water meters and any water extensions, whatever it takes to serve those lots, it's paid for. Whether it's $1,000 or $10,000 for them to pay for that they've paid for it. And the second thing is that water provider has to say, we guarantee for 30 years we can provide that water.
Yeah.
I've talked with a water developer on the project I'm working on right now. It's taken,
Stand up to the microphone so everybody can hear you at the both.
I'm Don Volker, by the way.
Yeah.
It's taken a 5-acre tract and cut it into 2 pieces. And the owner / developer got a letter from the water provider for each new lot. So he has 1 connection. So if he'd have built 1 house, this wouldn't even be an issue. So he gets a letter from the water provider saying we will serve, they have the CCN. So he gets a letter saying we will provide the water. And they're bound by law with the CCN to provide the water or take them out of the CCN, which they're not doing. Well, this 30-year thing is an issue. Because
Right.
I've talked to the man,
Right.
and he said, we're bound.
That's been solved now.
Has it?
The 30-year issue, I talked to the attorney, assistant general counsel, water development board, and we have language that we're working on that they're going to look at and approve that, and the intent is to serve 30 years.
Good.
Something that they can have.
He was saying there's no limit in what their CCN, their CCN have to provide water from now on.
Yeah,
And that was going to be an issue with him signing that when it limits what they provide, so.
their general counsel, or assistant general counsel,
You got it.
agreed that there was a problem, that some of the stuff was not envisioned when they
Okay.
legislature wrote the
Right.
rules.
Never mind.
Never mind.
That's hot off the press, just so you know, because I'd have told you if I knew we had a solution.
Yeah.
So, and I know that Jonathan was working on that last week.
That was Friday, I talked to Joe Reynolds,
That's
Friday.
good. That'll help.
Good, 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 good. That'll
It's like a
help.
full-time job, isn't it?
How long that's gonna, the process?
He's got a plat that's pending. Do we know how long that might take?
We can get something through right away for that one.
I didn't know if y'all had to vote on it and do everything else, and if that's you would wait, you know.
It'll be a letter, and they want to approve it, but they said don't hold up one, go ahead and do the best we can, based on what they told the girl.
Good,
Well, and
good,
with
good.
2 letters from the water provider, it should be okay.
It's okay. They have had to deal with this very similar issue in a situation I can't remember.
I bet.
And they've had to, it's the intent to
Good.
provide water, and they
That's
will
good.
provide the infrastructure.
Excellent.
That'll help. Well, my recommendation would be to leave that language alone, because, once again, the model subdivision regulations kick in for anything that's 5 acres or less. And so, they've got they have work they have to do in a whole separate section anyway.
No, I think if we leave it in, we need to add a sentence or sentences and explain that if you're less than 5 acres, this does not apply. Because you're gonna have to, and refer it to the model subdivision,
Yeah.
the section that does.
You're talking about where it be?
Yeah.
So we could just remove that whole section D, so maybe go back to that table and just remove anything that is under 5 acres.
Under 5 acres.
Okay, that'll simplify this a lot.
Just take D out.
Yeah.
Charlie, where does the 5 acres, where did that come from? Is that,
I think the intent of the 5 acre or greater is that you can have a water well on it.
It came from Headwater based on their water availability and what their calculations.
For the whole county, yeah.
the reason I ask is because my understanding that Gillespie County is 3 acres. And so
And Kendall 6.
Different water region.
much more populated
Different
county next
aquifer.
to the city. too.
Yeah, but they're different options.
We're a more rural county.
Different aquifer.
But is that just a gold standard that's nebulous?
It was based on calculations of the Trinity Aquifer and the Edwards Aquifer and
Right.
the amount of water, you know, if you have the certain size of exempt well and all that.
It's
So there was a
the
basis
same thing
for
we're
it.
talking about now. How small do you make them? How large do you have to have? That's what they did then on that, and we're doing.
Everything's based on that.
Well, you have to have some kind of a
Right.
calculation.
It's based on Headwater's well limits and allowables inside the CC, the water provider.
Yes, sir.
It was not arbitrary.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? So when we were talking about before about dividing the lots, the 4 acre lots into, the 4 acre lot into 8, you have water and sewer. So are y'all talking about changing that to where, you know, say if I have water and sewer, can I do half acre lots in the county? Instead of dividing by 2 like we've done before, we have like 15 acres that we have water and sewer, but we still have to go divide by 2. To get lot sizes.
That's what if you're going that small, you're gonna go into the model subdivision rules, and that has different criteria that'll go back to what the water utility company has as part of the
Like I
determination.
said, it could be a possibility now to divide that, but we have 15 acres, we decided not to do that because the lot size was so large. But
There will be, but I mean, you have to account for roads and other things
Right,
potentially
right.
too. So I mean, if you have 8 acres, it's doubtful you would get, or 15 acres.
But that,
Right.
you know, something we can sit down and talk
Right,
about.
now we-
We need to talk
Yeah,
about that.
it could potentially be something we can talk about.
It was-
I didn't think it was a possibility.
Yeah, what we're talking about today may have just taken that whole table and very simplified it. We need to, I'm gonna run that through you, Jonathan, after I have a chance
We
to
need
look
to
at
look
that.
at that.
I'll wait till.
We know where we're trying to get, we're just trying to figure out how to get there. And it'll only be for areas that have wastewater
And water.
and,
And,
So it's,
central water and wastewater,
right,
which is pretty limited. And on this, just for the public to know, we will visit with Headwaters because they determine the water availability side of this. Okay.
Okay. Well, the next section after that is the whole residential subdivisions, which create 2 or more lots that are 5 acres or less, which we've been visiting on. I'll go through real quickly. There's about 10 points to make on that. A plat's required. None of the exemptions
Which
apply.
section are you in, Charlie?
This is
Resident
5.01G.
Okay.
5.01G. You need a written retail water agreement. That's the Appendix M that we were talking about that has the 30-year guarantee, which we believe Commissioner Letts has some simplified language for that that'll get us there. You need to, let's see, if you're going to establish a retail water utility, you've got to obtain a CCN or a groundwater availability study, and no use of mobile devices to supply domestic needs. You can't have a water truck out there providing water to people. That's just not allowed. You either need an organized wastewater treatment permit or a written retail wastewater agreement, which is Appendix N. Looked at that Appendix N today. It doesn't say anything about 30 years, just so you know. It's more simple than Appendix M. I'm not real sure why, but and then, or you could, of course, use OSSF. And then there's a section on there about gray water systems for reuse of treated water. There's a section in there about sludge disposal, building setbacks. You have to go with whatever the more stringent ones are, which we have 50-foot setbacks already required in our subdivision regulations. So you've got to go with those from the right-of-way. It's 5 foot from the property lines. And then there's a note that goes on the plat about the number of dwellings per lot. That's for anything that's 5 acres or less. There's a note that says no more than 1 single family dwelling on each one of those lots. There's a final engineering report and financial guarantees for any improvements. There's an Appendix O that's used for that. But that's what we call the model subdivision regulations. After that, we have other developments. Planned unit developments, cluster developments, and condominiums. That's 5.01H.
What page
And,
you on, Charlie?
I'm not sure what page this is on. I'm going through the cheat sheet checklist.
I think about 19,
Yeah, page 30.
30?
But we, if you're looking at the subdivision regulations,
Bottom page 30, 5.018.
yes, that's right. Bottom of page 30 and top of page 31.
Charlie,
Yes,
just a general, I'm not gonna recommend that we make the less than 5 acres is 5.02 and move all of the rest of these up in front under 5.01. I think they get lost back here. Not changing any wording, it's just moving them where they, kind of the organization is. I'll go over that later with you.
Okay.
Now, on that topic, before we get away from that, and this is really a discussion for a different time, but when this gets posted online, it should have cross-referencing and some highlighted. In other words, I'm reading along and it says that's pursuant to section whatever. So I can click on it and find that, make it easy,
Right.
which will be an IT thing. But if we have IT set this thing up so that you have a list of topics, say, I'm looking for, to make it easy for the taxpayer, for the developer. I'm looking for a certain thing. I don't have to read all this. I look for those topics, 5 categories, 10 categories, whatever. Click on that and it goes to this section that I need to review.
Okay.
But prior to that, what Commissioner Letts was just talking about, that as you read through these, you realize some of them are maybe a little bit out of order. I needed to have done that before I did this. That there's a statement about, you need to know these things before you start. You need to answer these questions before you start. So that's the presentation part of it. As I say, it's for another time, but it'll make it a lot easier. Anybody that's ever used Wikipedia and you're reading along about something and it mentions a name or a place or something, and you can click on that and it takes you there. All of this could be there. And that won't be an easy job, but it needs to be done that IT can do it. This young guy right here, he hates me right now. But you, young? I said young, that was the key word. Yeah, Benjamin there. So, but that's really important, how ease of access for it.
Well, at least like where it says residential subdivisions, put all those between pages 25 and 30 or something else.
Yeah, right.
That's a little bit easier to do, and I think that achieves the same thing. It'd be easy to find that way.
But that'd require, a lot of guidance from you, Charlie, because these guys will know how to do it. You'll know what should be done. Well, and Commissioner Lex.
He hates you now too.
Join the club.
Growing club.
Most hated man in Kerr County.
Okay, we get past the sections that talk about all the different types of development and lot size now. Now we start getting into what's required as far as roads and waste disposal systems.
Charlie, well, question I had, projection of roads.
Yes.
I agree with the concept and it's in 232, but I don't think we have ever been able to modify a subdivision to have a spot where a road would go into an adjoining open property. And I think we should, except that they all are, we have private roads, so that, in the majority of our new subdivisions. But projection of roads, is that something that we really would ever do?
We've got a number of those now where there's raw land that hasn't developed yet, and the right-of-way's there, so that can happen. And
But are we currently doing that? I don't recall since I've been on the court that we've ever gone to a developer and said,
we've always made sure that nobody's landlocked. That's the main thing. That's really, to me, that's really what this is about, is that you don't leave somebody hanging out there. And so that's really where I've seen it, and it is usually the developer that owns that next piece, and he's not going to landlock himself, so he does stub the road to the border so that he can continue to develop. I can't think of any other, all the years you've seen these plats.
It's been an issue before when the developer has a piece of property and there's vacant land, it may or may not be landlocked, probably not.
Right.
And they want them to extend it. In the city, they have a requirement that you can't just end your road, you gotta extend it to that property.
Well, under the famous Robertson Road that we've been talking about.
Yes, that was the one I was thinking of.
Okay, it goes right up to the property line undeveloped and then stops. I don't know when that was originally platted, if that was the plan or not, probably was.
And there's a solution for that if the developer intends to, one of these days, develop further, then a cul-de-sac goes in.
Right.
And it's labeled as temporary, but it actually gets constructed.
Right.
And it's there, and because sometimes their intentions, you never know what happens with the market. They sell the property, 15, 20 years later,
I think
nothing's happened.
that's the key, is to have a quote temporary cul-de-sac
Yes, sir.
there at a location like that. Because I can think of several in precinct 2 where that's happened and there's no cul-de-sac.
Yes, sir.
I think there's some, Yorkville South had some of those. Seems like we dealt with one last year where they had to put in a cul-de-sac.
Yes, sir.
Something just dead end.
But our regulation that anything over 99 feet gets a cul-de-sac
Right.
has solved that every time. We just didn't have that regulation 50, 60
Correct.
years ago. I've got pages 32 and 33 of the subdivision regulations highlighted, the whole 5.03. That's the waste disposal system. I didn't know if there was any additional discussion that you all wanted to have on that.
I guess one of the things, I'm not reading through it, in 5.03A, and that isn't Ashley here?
Yes.
Yes.
It looks like, it says all lots to be served by OSSF shall have such OSSF installed in compliance with Kerr County subdivision rules and regulations. The word compliance I have an issue with. I guess my question is, it seems to me that when we're doing a new subdivision, there's an existing septic system on there, and it's not failing, yet we require a lot of work to be done a lot of times, from checking exactly where it is and things of that nature. Sometimes it's needed, other times it seems to be a waste. Is there a way to make it more clear to the public as to when we have to do, what? And it seems like, and I'm thinking of what's come to, I don't want to use individual persons, but one recently where there's someone,
Driveway.
the driveway went across, and driveway is not really an accurate word. Someone went to an outhouse, not in that type of house, went to an outbuilding.
It was a cabin.
To a cabin.
Cabin.
And drove across it occasionally, and I can think of very few septic drain fields where someone hasn't driven across it some. And I think, just the compliance seems odd to me as a term. If it's failing, it needs to be brought to standards. But if it's not failing, it should be left alone unless it's near a lot line. And then clearly you need to define it. Is there a way that we could put that more clearly in the rules? Or is it just?
I want to say, I don't have my rule book with me,
Right.
but we try to mimic exactly what Chapter 285 states into this. Shall be installed into compliance, so all lots served by OSHA.
Anyway, I don't have to resolve right now. That's just a
Right.
concern that I have. And it depends. There are certain situations when we've clearly found a kind of revision of plats where they wanted to revise it across the drain field. And in those situations, you definitely need to find it if there's a lot line being moved near where we know there's an existing drain field. But at other times, it seems like it's unnecessary. We need to be in compliance with state law. That word jumped out at me when I was just reading through this.
Well, I know we have a general note that goes on the plats. It says they need to be installed in compliance with current and future rules, OSSF rules and regulations. And I don't see that word on here, future.
Anyway.
Current.
That was, the other question I had, Charlie, this is, I don't know who this is, you or to Ashley on this one. On page 33, they have 30 days to respond in writing. Well, you don't have 30 days. If the OSSF is part of our subdivision work, how do we there's not a 30-day, they're inconsistent. For state law says you have to reply within 30 days, and environmental health has 30 days. I can see that there's a train wreck right there.
Right.
Environmental health. Well, OSSF says 45 in Chapter 285.
No, but you don't.
Oh, we don't, yes. We do
No,
it
but under subdivision, we now have 30, and this is
Right.
part of subdivision. So you really have 15 days, or something like that, or there has to be a period less than 30 for environmental health to do the review, yet your rules say 45 days. But I'm saying that we don't have 45 days any longer, we don't have 30 days anymore.
And we say, we say 30 on here. I was wondering, I'm not real sure how to rectify that.
So, I mean, we're gonna have to have, environmental health's gonna have to do their full review, probably, I mean, maybe 20 days, I don't know what the number is.
I would say that they do that. They come under that wire big time. They're always way less than 30 days. They're very fast.
Well, we need something in writing.
They are very fast, but I don't know what number you should put here, or if you just remove that, I don't know what to do. Here's what it states, I'll read it. It says, "The Kerr County Environmental Health Department will either approve or deny the planning materials in writing within 30 days of receipt."
And that's the problem, that's in conflict with the new state law in my mind.
Well,
It is.
Because we have 30 days to reply with a checklist,
Yeah.
and if Charlie has to do
If they do a
that.
preliminary plat.
If they just file it, we have 30 days to approve it. If we don't note there's a septic problem, it gets approved anyway, regardless of what 285 says.
right.
And-
So you can't,
And we'll probably have sooner than 30.
yeah.
But I think the environmental health needs to be aware that we no longer, I'm glad they're getting that quicker, but they don't have 30 days, is what I'm saying. So, I think you two need to come up with what number should go in there.
Right.
And that's gotta be less than
Something
30
from
days.
OSS.
So circle.
Get more powerful, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Next section, 504 is utility lines.
Wait, another one on that. I have things underlined, I gotta figure out why. 33 is 7, under the OSS, that's a comprehensive drainage plan. What does that mean on the OSSF side?
checklist for this, but, so, about 10 years ago or so, with one of the previous directors, they went to Region 13 with TCQ and got a specific, checkoff list of what each item from 284, Chapter 285.4C. And comprehensive drainage plan typically will be like the directions of slope is what we've asked that they put. It's actually very simple. Typically, our professionals would do just directions of slope, or with the contour lines, we can determine that as well with the drainage, but I don't think there's a specific definition for that.
I guess my concern on some of these, and I'm looking at compliance and comprehensive, is that we get a fair number of complaints on OSSF. We need to be able to not have it subjective like this looks like to me. We need to figure out how to have a checklist or appendix or something that's very clear to the public as to what these things mean.
And we do,
Maybe it needs to be incorporated in the rules.
Okay. Well, I know we did try to incorporate, I'll have to look at that checklist, but we did incorporate what we got from Region 13 from TCQ, and we added it to this because it was very vague, and so a lot of times when the surveyors would come in, we explained to them what our protocol was, and then we provide them that list so they can pass it on to their professional.
Right. And I just think that we just need to have as much of it outlined in here as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be an appendix. Doesn't
Okay.
have to be, I think that.
So a better
Here we are.
idea of what drainage study would be. Is that what you're needing?
Yeah, and it sounds like from what you're saying that that's somewhere it is about topography. But basically what you're asking is the topography.
Well, we also said they, will include just direction of slope.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So should it say comprehensive?
I think the words are, we just need to define the words better.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree with that, but if you change the wording here and you say the county's drainage plan instead of a comprehensive plan, then Ashley has that information in her office.
I'll leave it to those two to figure out.
Right.
Right.
But if you say comprehensive, Commissioner Lutz is right, it really should be enumerated.
Good.
Okay. Ready to get a 5.06, Charles?
Yes, sir.
5.06, that's drainage.
5.06.
Can we go to one quick question on 505?
Oh, you bet. Concrete
Concrete
monuments.
monuments. The only reason I say, I know this is just a checklist, but in the rules, it says a study area. Can we add the word study onto that line?
One concrete monument obtains.
This is when we're talking about having a subdivision that's in a flood hazard zone.
And the word studied is in parentheses there. Ah, see, I added it for you since last time.
On the checklist.
Oh, make it on the checklist too?
There you go.
The checklist, okay.
Would that be all right? Just-
No, that's fine. That's good, that's good. Yeah,
That's it.
Well, regarding topos, the city now
Study.
provides
Right.
contours online from LiDAR, 2-foot contours. And I know that Bobby, I believe, has access to some LiDAR data where perhaps that could be incorporated into the county where all this presenting topos to the county, it wouldn't even be necessary.
Currently, the ones that I have are all stuff from Timrus.
Yes, sir.
It's also on the board's website. And we just download sections at a time as needed.
Yeah, the city has them for, I think, within the ETJ or mileage out, and they're 2-foot contours, and it's really an incredible tool for the public and just for planning, and it would be incredible to me for OSSF and drainage and so much data that this, to where everybody doesn't have to gather it all up and present it. It's available to everybody. It's probably at a low cost could be available to the.
It is low cost, it is available. Getting it off of the hard drive that they give you, and then putting it where we can utilize it is extremely time consuming. I'd love to have that for the entire county, and I realized that when I asked Bobby to do that for me, what it was doing to him, and it's too much data. It's too big. So instead, when we've got to have data in a particular area, I said, can you get it for this one section, please? I know it's going to take you an hour to do that, but can you do that? And there's hundreds of sections throughout the county.
And not only that, we don't own it, so we would probably have to put a link to point you in the right place anyway. I don't know that we can just get it and make it available.
Is that a controlled database? It would be, probably.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
So if you're gonna
I know we have access to it, and we've been able to utilize
If
it.
you're gonna
but
reference it, use it somewhere, it needs to be, have some sort of credentials or control. So you
Well, the
know.
Texas Natural Resource Information System is who owns it. It's owned by the state of Texas.
Okay.
The data files are just tremendously huge.
Yeah.
2-foot
but don't
contours
create-
for our area.
Yeah, but
Oh my gosh.
don't create them unless you have to for a specific area.
That's what we've been doing,
Right.
just on a case by case. Yes, sir. 5.06, if you're looking at your subdivision regulations and you want to turn to page 34 and 35, all the way through 37. We went over this the other day with the manufactured housing rental community. We had the developer go with the pre and post drainage should be equal. Your pre-construction drainage, the way it drains today needs to match post-construction. And we had a kind of a sliding scale in our subdivision regulations, depending on how many acres and how many lots, and there was a whole lot of different ways of looking at it, slicing it. And based on what we recently went through, the direction from the court was that, hey, if you're going to do the subdivision regulations, if you're going to do it in the model, in the manufactured housing regulations, let's do it everywhere. That whole table that shows you the sliding scale would come out, all the paragraphs that describe that gets you that table would come out, and it would be all replaced simply with one sentence that says, the calculated post-construction runoff flow rates at the points of flow leaving the subdivision should not exceed the pre-construction runoff rate for the post-construction drainage basins for each calculated storm frequency. And I can make that even better by, instead of saying should not exceed, I probably should have it say shall not exceed. If you'd like, I
I like it, but
do we need the should in there for the sometime, an engineer that is a reasonable engineer comes up with something reasonable and says, I can't quite get there, is that way you would like for it to say should instead
no,
of shall?
I'm fine with shall.
Okay.
My butt is much bigger than that. The question comes.
Can you say that again?
It goes to the second paragraph. Licensed engineer of record shall certify the final plat. That right there means that every subdivision that you're going to require an engineer to hire an engineer and get that engineer to sign off on it. And all we're doing is costing, on these little subdivisions, causing the property owners a lot of money for no reason.
Now, where's that at?
Amen.
506.
34.
34.
I would say for no reason, for
Bottom.
very little reason.
But I was gonna say, but there may be a reason.
And that is the reason we came up with a little bit of a sliding scale, that if you're, taking a 1,000-acre ranch
Sure.
and putting a road in and selling off 5 lots, that now that whole ranch has to be engineer study. And all you're doing is putting a road in there. And that's a huge waste of money in my mind, and that's why we did the sliding scale to say, because you put a road in, you're gonna change it a little bit. I agree that we need to get rid of the language that was in there, but there's gotta be some provision to not require every subdivision to have to hire a licensed engineer to do a drainage study on the entire property, whether it's 2 acres or 2,000 acres. It depends. It's got to have some discretion in it. And I don't know if you're willing to take on that discretion, as it requires a drainage study or not, but it just seems to me an unnecessary cost to the property owner, the developer.
Well, Jonathan, I think that's the reason our present rules have the exemption that says for any subdivision with lots greater than 20 acres, and any subdivision that's 5 lots or less is exempted from the drainage requirements, for that very reason.
That's the reason we did it, but we also know that the way we did it isn't right either. So it has caused problems. So I don't have a solution, but I'm bringing up that getting rid of it causes a lot of problems. It's going to cost a lot of property owners a lot of money.
Well, I would say the starting
for
point,
engineers.
if you think there's problems with the current one, to figure out what those are, and then, we eliminate them that way, process of elimination. What have been the problems so far? Can you think of an example?
Blue Ridge,
A lot. Blue
the
Ridge.
intersection of Blue Ridge and Highway 27, commercial development went in there. They followed our
That's a
regulations.
commercial
We're talking about
development.
residential though.
Yeah, we're talking residential here, this is subdivision rules, so.
Then there's a difference.
Those same rules apply.
Yeah, definitely.
And I recognize that there's a difference in, that's why when I started writing this, I started doing a section that was, I separated it residential and commercial. It's a problem. And we even have a residential subdivision that went in Hunt that is a problem. I don't know whose phone rings every time it rains, but mine does. And
Yeah, his doing. I know who it is.
And yours does. Mine does.
And that was purely residential, and they were exempt from providing calculations. They were not exempt from causing an adverse impact. And
That one
so,
affects a public road,
they-
the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
and private property on the other side of
So
that road.
That one, which we've discussed in here before, that has other issues involved in it too. When you're talking about road constructions and all that. And I get that.
That one had no road construction on it at all.
Right.
But it affects a road that exists.
Yes.
So, but runoff, whether it comes from commercial, residential, creates a problem for somebody else, and that's the issue.
Right.
So I get that, but trying to figure out what's wrong right now and why it's wrong right now, well, is the beginning of it, I think.
I mean, the reason I agree that we need to get rid of our other rules, I don't think we had sufficient engineering data for what we put in the rules. I think if we're gonna do it, we need to have some,
Right.
criteria signed off by, that an engineer created and looked at it. And I don't know how you do that. I'm not an engineer, that's why.
I will say this, that all things floodplain related, there are times when we need a no-rise certificate from an engineer. And some of those no-rise certificates are very simple, and they do not have to go through a detailed model to come up with a solution. They sign and seal a document that generally states the reasons why they believe that it's no adverse impact, and that there's no rise. And they put their sign and seal, and we check that, and we double check to make sure that they didn't just,
Why couldn't you do this the same way?
and it would be the same way.
Why couldn't you do this?
It's the same way for drainage, so, not every subdivision is gonna have the same drainage issues. I don't know how else to slice it up. I don't know how to write a document that says, okay, you definitely have to have an engineer involved in here, and on this one you don't.
But if
because-
something is really simple, some engineer can look at it and do it just like you said for floodplain, then that ought to be sufficient. Then you don't have to do all of the engineering
It's
models.
sufficient, but it's probably $200.
200, well,
You find an engineer, licensed
Well,
engineer, that's gonna do it for,
no, but I'm
For
saying,
free.
so for a couple $100,
Yeah.
that's
More than 200.
Yeah.
Huh?
I think it could go up to $1,000 for something that you just talked about.
Yeah, but it can also be really simple, so it would be $200.
Probably 1,000.
You want something.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just-
maybe 500.
You want the bargain basement deal.
I just think that, I just hate to burden our landowners, whether developers, property owners, families, small, that's trying to, sell off a lot to help their retirement, whatever the reasons. I hate to just burden them with another cost from the county. And I don't know how we, get around it, it's an area that's why one of the reasons we put all that language in there. And it has caused a problem. So I think we need to modify it or take it out. But I just don't like the fact that the easy solution, we'll just let them pay.
Well, the other way you could do it
more
is
money.
say-
I don't like that.
Say approval of the county engineer, but then that, rather than them hiring an engineer, and if the county engineer doesn't agree, or agrees, then you could do it that way.
Yeah, that's getting into a gray area of having them practicing
I
engineering.
know,
for-
the whole thing is a gray area. You're trying to not overburden somebody, but yet you don't want to cause an adverse condition for somebody downstream.
So I don't have a good solution. We don't need to talk about it. I've raised my concern. I think we need to look at this a little bit more. Maybe somebody else has some ideas. Or maybe someone in the public is listening will say.
I hope there's something that's simple that can be proposed, because we're at a point in the county where most of the low-hanging fruit is developed. And the stuff that's left, you go in there and you cut down a few cedar trees, and now your neighbor's screaming at you.
Where did you get that most of it's been, low-hanging fruit's been developed? I think you're wrong. I think there's a lot more.
There's a lot more
Come
east.
about with
East.
what's happening in the east, right?
Yeah, that just opened up though.
Yeah, but there's a lot of property that's got a lot of slope to it, and anyone does anything to it, and the neighbors who scream.
Yeah.
And,
So here's my question, that we have a licensed professional engineer inserted in this for what actual reason? Is that a legal thing?
Yes.
Or?
yes, that is the legal term for an engineer. They need to be a licensed professional engineer,
Rich.
not just an engineer.
So
And
if that
registered
being the case-
actually is no longer, they're not registered anymore, they're licensed professional
Licensed.
engineers.
Right,
Same
but what I'm getting to is this, if that's in there for a reason, then you leave it in there, you don't take it out.
Correct.
Okay. If it's for legal reasons, then you leave it
It
in
is.
there and somebody has to incur the cost. I don't see any way around that.
Now, does it say, is there any requirement that drainage plans be prepared by a licensed professional engineer?
Yes. I think that in the instance of any commercial lot, certainly, there should be an engineer involved up front to some degree. Either that or maybe there is a note that we can put on the plat that puts it on whoever buys that lot. Say that we've got a lot that's being, and we had this discussion this morning, Lee and I, we've got a developer that has a lot that it's going to be commercial, and they have a potential buyer. The buyer hasn't bought yet, but when they do, and they go out there and start to develop it, they could create a really big drainage problem very quickly. And they need to hire an engineer at that point. It'd be great if we knew up front what was going in, but that's not always the case with plats. That's kind of the catch-22 on that.
But you don't want to do some work and then get your professional engineer.
Well, there are two areas
Yes.
that are concerned. Number one is the road you're building. It's impervious material and
That's
that's
the
going to
other.
cause problems. I think that's the only thing that should be addressed at the time of platting. If you have 30 lots and 3 of those lots build something that causes the drainage to go around to the neighbor, that's their problem. It's not the developer's problem. And I'm like Charlie, I think we should put a note on there that's saying that no one should build anything that will adversely affect the neighbors. Because you can't, if you got 30 lots and you're building the street and you take care of the drainage for the street, you can't take care of everybody's drainage on every 30 lots.
And I think that was when this was written, I really think the intent was you're coming in with a subdivision and you're building a road. As soon as you stick a road in there, now you've got bar ditches. Well, there didn't used to be a road there, so now the water used to go across right here. Now some of it's being collected, and you're concentrating water here and there. You probably need some kind of a detention pond or some structure to get that back to the way it was, slow things down so that before it leaves the subdivision, it's back the way it was. So that the next door, the ranch next door or whatever's next door, everything's back the way it was before they started. I think that was the intent behind this, but the other issue that we're having is the commercial lots. And what
Well,
to do with those.
there's something else that we saw in the court here recently, and people get excited when you're in that interim stage of construction too, because that changes runoff
Yes, it does.
considerably while you're, before you even complete it, and you're gonna get complaints about that. And it's back to what Don's talking about, there's not a lot of help in that. You get a big torrential rain on you in the middle of construction, you're gonna get runoff, it's not gonna be the same as it is when you're complete.
Right.
Charlie, could we possibly leave an exemption with the addition of a note on the plat that Don did you and Don have referred to? Is that maybe a way to?
And we're doing it practically right now,
Right.
because it's the right thing to do, and we believe that makes us compliant with state law.
And I was referring mainly to residential subdivisions, not commercial. Commercial to me is a little different on your drainage than the residential.
Well, I would think that if it's residential and they're developing roads, there needs to be there's gonna be an engineer involved anyway.
Right, residential.
But you're talking a residential where there's no roads involved,
Right.
there's no public improvements involved, they're taking advantage of the existing public, maybe that's what we need.
Jonathan's scenario, the guy that's got a lot, he needs to cut off half of it so he can make his bills and not have to hire an engineer. But would that note take care of anybody that did anything with that?
I think it would.
I think that's about the best way to address
That
it.
might be the best way.
Those are the people I'm really more concerned about, the developers that are,
Amen, I agree.
Building a road, they need to have it.
they need to engineer anyway.
Well, how would that work then?
It would be worded that if there's no public improvements being, and let me wordsmith this later, but I'm gonna summarize it for you. If there's no public improvements involved with the subdivision, then thou shalt place this note on the plat. And that satisfies, you're pushing the engineering off to the next, whoever buys it.
Right.
And then if they come in just with a residential house, they're probably okay. If they come in with something commercial, they're really gonna need an engineer. on that. I think so.
Does that satisfy?
That,
I have to look at the wording.
Yeah.
I mean,
The wordsmith,
That's, I like where he's going, what he's trying to say. I
Right.
think.
Yeah.
it's headed in the
Sure.
right direction.
Right.
But,
That's good discussion. So that is drainage.
Before we start something
it.
else, why don't we take about a 5-minute break?
Okay.
Good idea.
Let's come back to order.
Coming up for you. Sort of.
So where are we going now?
That pretty much rounds up all of Chapter 5, subdivision standards checklist. Does anybody in the audience have anything else on Chapter 5 they want to go over, or any of the court?
Did we, there is some underlying stuff here that we didn't cover, I don't think. And it is on page 35.
That's all the drainage.
Well, this underlying part in particular is what I'm talking about. Is this something that's gonna stay in there?
Yes, I'm proposing that goes in there.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Nothing that we just talked about affected that or changed it?
No, no, sir.
Not yet.
Not yet. I like that. So we move on to Chapter 6, plating. And we've got, I'm going to go through the major titles, and if someone stop me if there's something you want to talk about. Sale of lots. No sale of lots until the court has approved and filed the final plat. There's an optional concept plan, an optional preliminary plat. Don't have to do them. Don't have to do them. Final plat and data. And
Yeah, exactly.
Jonathan, the language we have here, and maybe this is how we solve the issue with OSSF, is instead of saying we'll get to you in writing within 30 days, we just say submit the final plat 28 days prior. You know, saying make sure that they submit it to OSSF so they can begin reviewing. Because they end up, like you're saying, OSSF is ending up having to be on exactly the same schedule that I'm on
Right.
as far as deadlines.
I'm just thinking, you know, I just don't want a situation, because that 30 days isn't very long, and you know, you get sick for a couple of days, Bobby's at the school, we're at the 28th day and OSSF says, oh, we have a problem, and no one gets in touch with the developer
Right.
properly. Because Bobby's out of town, and it's not an environmental health issue, it's gotta come out of, I think, from the subdivision administrator.
Yeah.
So I think the subdivision administrator has to, you need a couple of days, you don't wanna be up to the final day, so I think it needs to be done, I'd say 20 days.
And what has to happen in that 20 days?
Well, whatever environmental or OSSF review, whatever they do in environmental health on the review, they have to go through it and see if the subdivision is submitted meets all their criteria, and if not, they've got to get it to Charlie so that Charlie can then say, you have not met this requirement.
So we were gonna let Charlie and Ashley decide that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really, what happens if we get in that scenario, and we very well may be in that scenario today with some plats, my attention has been so focused on getting this done that I've delayed reviewing some plats. And got those comments out Friday last week and Monday today. And if the developer says, I still want to fit that 30-day schedule, well, then I may have some items next week on Monday that say, I'm asking you to approve it conditionally, and here's the conditions.
Right.
And we can still do that. I think that the developers have an option. They can push for that, and we can still do it on that timeline, or they can say, it's all right, I want to bring this nice and clean, I have time. They don't always have that time, and that's what the 30 days is for. They don't always have that time. So it's really up to them, and it's up to your clients. If they say no, you turned it in on September 3rd, I better be on the September 28th agenda, well then by golly, we'll put it on there. And we can do that.
But in terms of process, from the time the request comes into the county, who's the first set of eyes to look at?
First set of eyes, they actually have to bring us a routing slip that shows that they've sent it to everyone. And the new routing slip has engineering last on the list. So they will have gone to environmental health, they will have gone to the clerk, they will have gone to 911. Potentially, they may have gone to Headwaters.
But some of that's internal. So what I'm getting at is that would trigger.
Well, it's external from the standpoint that the surveyor hand walking these to each department. They don't
Right.
drop a stack off and say, hey,
No,
distribute it.
what I mean is
No.
that, for example, if I'm called by somebody here that affects OSSF, I'm the point of contact and I immediately call them. So if there's a process by which the first department that receives the information notifies others internally, then you can, or go straight to, this goes straight to the issue of how many days we have. So you get immediate notice.
The days start when they submit it to engineering.
Right. But everybody needs to know that. So that was what I was getting at.
Right.
So who would be responsible for that?
Bobby?
We currently, so far, OSSF is the only ones we notify. 911 and the others are notified by the surveyor through the routing slip. But we coordinate with environmental directly.
So you're gonna see it first.
Yes.
So Bobby sees it first and notifies everybody, whomever, in an email or whatever official
Yes.
document we need, then we're done. Everybody's notified, you know you have 28 days or 15
That's
days
true.
or whatever to do it.
That's true.
But it needs to, I think that should be part of the process if it's not already.
I think it is. I mean, I think it's,
I don't think there's anything missing, in other words, but if you make it official that you have to send receipt that you got this email and that you know this has to be done in however many days.
I don't think it's a big problem. I think that the time should be consistent.
We probably just need to remove that sentence completely from environmental health section.
The 30 days.
Just remove it.
Yeah,
Because
that's all.
all it's saying is that they're gonna get something in writing from environmental health within 30 days.
Right. And it's up to, and with, you take that sentence off, you and Bobby will.
The process is
like
being
you're doing
managed.
right now.
Yeah, as long as
Okay.
everybody's notified.
Okay. Final plat and data. Anybody need to stop anything they've seen on final plat and data? Move on. Revision of plat in an existing recorded subdivision, of an existing recorded subdivision. Anything there?
How much time does the court have to review the revision of plat?
That is a whole different timeline because of the
It's not the 30-day window
No.
now? I thought it was still-
the public hearing.
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's based on the public hearing
Okay.
and the document being correct when it gets here.
And there's no exemption to having a public hearing?
No,
It's an ending plat.
if you're revising the plat, then there's no exemption. There's an exemption on who you have to notify, depending on what you're doing with the plat.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes you don't have to notify everybody in the subdivision of what's going on. Right.
One of the things on revision of plat, there's been a lot of requests coming from sort of this side of the room.
Does that mean that's?
About an amending plat and of a way to avoid having to go through the revision process similar to what 212 allows. I still don't think 212 as written covers the counties, but we do have the ability, the counties, to add rules that are less, as long as it's less restrictive than the state rules. So we can, I think, add a rule that says if it's I'm just gonna throw out, say if it's, less than a 5% revision of the lot size, and adjusting lot lines, that's an amending plat and avoid the revision process. I think we can do that because I don't, it'd be interesting to get Chuck to weigh in on that.
I'd like to hear what Chuck has to say about
Yeah.
that. What do y'all think?
Well, there's been some discussion about, there's part of the 232 that allows counties to adopt, there's 3 sections in 212 that reflect many plats. One is no public hearing, you don't have to notify people for doing certain things, like moving a lot line, like if there's an encroachment, you want to move the lot line 10 feet, or if you want to combine lots or whatever. There are several, not just any revision plat, it's just certain plats that they come under the term of an amending plat. And there's along 232 that says this applies only to areas that are outside.
Yeah, we don't need to go into that part of it, we'll disagree on the language.
Either way, I think there's a way that we should be able to adopt similar language to that.
I think we
Well, what we're really talking about here, Don, is a de minimis change
Right,
to have to avoid
Right.
the plat revision process.
which is expensive to everybody.
I agree, and I've watched that for a long time now.
And, you know, especially getting rid of a lot line. I mean, that does not, the reason for the revision of plat, if you read the whole section, is you don't want to, you know, to adversely impact somebody of a property owner. Well, eliminating a lot line is not going to do that. I can't envision a way that.
I agree.
That,
But I like
yeah.
the 5%,
Yeah.
less than 5% or less.
5%, whatever, something like that, some percentage, I think that we need to incorporate that and model it after what is allowed to do well.
I'm with you 100%.
Good plan. I like that plan.
But the 5%,
Simplify.
the object is to not leave a substandard lot.
Right.
And so if it's 6% and don't leave a substandard lot, then you get onto a nebulous, you know, but I'm totally agreeing with you, but I'm throwing in
Right.
a, you know, a wrinkle.
There-
Well,
there's
it may
gotta
be a
line.
slip, it
I
may
mean,
be a
you-
slippery slope, Eric, but I think coming up with some kind of reasonable de minimis effect ought to be allowed. I mean, it's still going to be reviewed.
It gets filed, the amendment.
I'm
gets
hearing
filed.
6%.
No?
So, we'll take whatever we get.
But anyway, I think we need to incorporate that into a new section here, and get, Chuck to hopefully sign off on it. Because I think we have the authority to do it.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, John.
And when the property changes hands,
It's filed a record.
It's, yeah,
It's filed, the plat's updated, it's just that they don't have to go through the expense of public hearing.
right.
And the time,
Save the public who can't afford it, especially in the small, little old 1 or 2 lot deal.
Right.
You know, they save up their whole lot, sell a little piece off, you know,
Or somebody built the fence and it's in the wrong place.
That,
that's more.
I know about that,
Yeah.
right,
they've had a lot.
right.
So-
And it was ridiculous, you know, a foot or two on 500 acres and 100 acres and crazy. Right.
Anyway, okay.
Cancellation of subdivisions. Cancellation of subdivisions if land remains undeveloped. Do they have anything on that? And then finally amending plat.
Tell me.
Okay. We go to chapter 7. Chapter 7 is all about road design and
On
construction.
this, we may need to come up with the terminology that amending plat is something according to statute. What we're talking about is not a statute, it's a different kind of amending, but anyway, we have to be careful what we call it.
As long as we can get it to where we can do it, I don't care what you call it.
Sounds like it's called a de minimis change, a de minimis revision of plat.
What does de minimis
Follows the amending plat.
Call it slight
Little.
change,
minimize to it?
Little.
slight change.
Not of material consequence.
Right.
Okay.
So we're on 7 now?
So all of chapter 7 or section 7 of the subdivision regulations is all about road design and construction. And it really gets down into the weeds and the details.
You didn't change this picture, did you?
No, matter of fact, there were portions that were in chapter 1 and chapter 3 kind of that needed to come over here, and I put them over there, and then reorganized it so that it flowed. It's got real good flow right now. Everything's where it belongs.
Quick question on 70615 Country Lane. Presently, we do not require engineer design roads. Will the new rules require engineer design roads?
Yes,
So
Yes.
all roads now will be
Yes.
engineer design.
that would be a change, yeah. Yep. Chapter 8, or section 8, goes over inspections.
What do you think about that?
I didn't want to tell you what I think. I know when the rules were written, John, the present rules, that was an exception or exemption that the court considered because of the number of lots and the size of the road. It
Right.
just felt like to give a developer with small acreage subdivision, small number of lots, that they would give them a break on not having engineer design roads. Now, that didn't eliminate pipe crossings, things of that nature, drainage ditches. It just didn't mean a plan profile, which got pretty expensive for engineering roads. That make sense? That's my memory of why it was put in there that way.
Yeah. So it also, the place where it applies is if it's 8 lots or less, and all the lots have to be 10 acres or more. So it actually ends up being up to 80 acres that you're developing, and putting a road on 80 acres to serve 8 lots. That can be a pretty long road, and if an engineer didn't design it, there's no plan and profile. You got the contractor coming to me on, where's this road supposed to go? I talked to the surveyor. I didn't design it. Well, who engineered this? Nobody. Nobody engineered it. Just go build it. So that was the issue that I saw with that, is that I don't have a set of construction plans or as-built plans for a subdivision. And folks were getting real creative with the rule and going, oh, I don't have to do any engineering on this. And it didn't pass the feel right test of what engineers are supposed to do when they design a road.
And I agree with your example, but if you go with 2 acre, 3 acre, and someone has to build basically it's not much more than a driveway back, and having to require an engineer to go engineer a glorified driveway.
Well, there are,
excessive.
I just went through a little something in precinct 1 where you can have a really short run and a really steep grade and a really bad road, and the emergency workers won't come down there. You've got to get somebody up the hill to them to get in the ambulance. And we have, and my main concern with any of this is we have subdivisions all over Kerr County that have roads that are not built by engineers. They were just paved over whatever was there, and they are not up to spec for us to take them over, for the county to take them over. There's not enough people that live on it to form a road district and get the road built. And I don't want to see that keep happening around here. For safety's sake. For the emergency people to get down in there, put out the fire, for the ambulance to pick somebody up that's too heavy to be picked up.
Right.
Yep.
Why were you looking at that?
Well, he just happened to be handy.
I have a real problem with this.
Chapter 9 is a guarantee of performance. There's some, it talks about financial guarantees that the developer has to put up if he wants to file the plat before he does any public improvements. And then chapter 10, or section 10, that is the end of the show, and that talks about, can't find it here. Here we go. I think the big one that I highlighted there was 10.03, subdivisions located within the ETJ of the municipality. My understanding is that at one time we entered into an agreement with the City of Kerrville, and then we exited that agreement. And we have no agreement right now. These subdivision regulations have not been changed to reflect that. And I think the intent was we would get back into an agreement. I don't think we have one. And I know that we kind of had a little headway with City of Ingram a few years ago on doing something of that sort, and it just lost steam. So I think right now, the areas in the ETJ of the city and Ingram, if you ask Ingram, they'll just say, if it's in the ETJ, we're not going to review it. We're going to defer that to the county. If it's in the city's ETJ, we're having developers come to us and they'll ask the city, hey, will you defer to the county? And I think most of the time they said, no, we'd rather review it. And so they've come to the county, and we'll say, if there's no roads involved, then we'll defer. But if there's a road and it's in the county, even if it's in the city's ETJ, we definitely want to review it. So there will be occasionally, if someone builds a road, right now, it'll be reviewed by both the city and the county at the same time.
We need to come up with an agreement, especially as the county continues to grow, because we have an agreement now, sort of, but it's not, probably won't pass the muster test, of state law. So we need to do that with both Ingram and Kerrville. And I think once we get our rules where we like them, I think we probably need to get with the city of Kerrville and go over certain provision. Roads, the biggest one, lot size, things of that nature. And the other thing that needs to be addressed in the, there's a difference of opinion on this, but the model subdivision rules, according to the state and according to the county, apply to the ETJ. I've heard mixed wording from the city whether they think it applies to the city and the ETJ or not. But clearly, the state says yes, they do. And in that area, that needs to be addressed in the agreement with the city. But yes, I think we need to get that done.
So how going forward, and I know that's what all of this is for, but let's say you got a new subdivision in Center Point, and the roads aren't built to the spec that we would need to take them over as county roads.
We won't
They
accept
get
it.
denied.
Right.
Okay.
And there's one other thing just to bring up. Charlie, you're done with your review, right?
Yes, sir. On Wednesday, we can discuss water, if you would like to, the water availability that's in appendix.
I know the judge is not going to be here. I don't think we need to meet Wednesday, Charlie.
Okay.
I really think that we need to probably go through, make these changes, come in with a final draft, and maybe, I don't know, we need to have a workshop on it, certainly pass it out, let everyone make sure they're happy with it, and then send it off to Chuck Kimbrough at the same time.
Manufactured housing rental community rules needs that change made to the drainage
Right.
that we've discussed.
Right.
There's a couple of typos that I saw in there. Just some small things that need to be fixed, and then there is a note that I think Chuck Kimbrough gave us that he would like added in there that since there's a law that says we cannot require a manufactured housing rental community developer to do something greater than our own subdivision standards, he gave us a note that needs to go on the plat that addresses that. Just in case he does on his own do that, that note states he realizes it and he's going to a higher standard all on his own, not because of us.
So the idea is give this whole, once revision, give the whole thing to Chuck.
Right, let's get it cleaned up and then send it to Chuck.
Right.
And then we can, it's close enough, we're getting real close.
Right.
But the one thing that we haven't talked about yet today is, I think I propose, I've been going back and forth on this a lot, but I think it'd be a good idea for us to exempt from platting or exempt from being a subdivision tracts that are probably, over 10 acres and less than, places that are over 10, they're already exempt. Over 5 acres, accessing off, go back to the Bear Creek example. If somebody has 15 acres on Bear Creek Road and they want to sell off, or 16 acres, they want to sell off 3 lots. I really don't know why that has to be a subdivision. It has to be a subdivision because it's less than 10 acres. That triggers it. Gillespie County, I believe, it's either 2 or 3 acres, I'm not sure what there is, or 2 or 3 lots. And it came up, there's one on Lane Valley, it didn't have any impact on me, but the guy did it, and it was just like, it was a waste of everyone's time and effort for him. He sold off, he had 15 acres, I think, Joey Asher. He sold off, 7 acres, I think, and he had to plat it.
Right.
And it's like, how does that benefit the public in any way?
Right.
So
If we need
What that
right of way
cost?
on that road.
Yeah.
I didn't ask him because I was trying to hide from him during that period. But I would imagine it cost him probably $5,000.
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
My only concern on that would be if right of way needs to be dedicated on that road,
And we got right away from Joey on part of that, didn't we?
because he platted it.
Because he platted it.
Only because he platted it, otherwise we wouldn't have got it.
Yeah.
And
Well, but there'd be a way you could get.
you
it.
could do 5 acres, 5 acres, 5 acres, all the way down Lane Valley and not get right of way on any of them, and then have homes with no building setback lines that are built too close, and then when you need to widen the road, you're gonna have to relocate homes. It just,
Yeah, I'm
Not
tossing it out
sure
there.
that I agree.
I'm just about try to save people or taxpayers money for things that I think are necessary, and that's one that is, I understand that there is a valid reason for it, we can get right away. But they could also, it's just costing people a lot of money for not much
the
benefit.
other side of that coin is, right now, 10 acres, 10 acres, 10 acres, 10 acres, and we don't say anything about that.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that it's happening at 10 right now.
Yeah, it happens at 10.
Well, you could just add the 5% net.
Six.
6%. 5.06.
Anyway, that's something to think about. Middle time to, I just brought that up because it's something that I've been thinking about in Gillespie County a lot.
Could you formulate some kind of little checklist that to avoid having to do that? In other words, where the right of way would be there if we needed it later?
Yeah, if it didn't involve the right of way.
Well, you could do, it's possible to have it go like a concept and give the county engineer and the commissioner ability to waive plating.
Oh,
Yeah.
there you go.
That sounds like.
If it's
that-
not
that
needed,
way
then they
can
move
look at
on.
each case individually.
There you
know
go.
Whether or not it comes
Yeah.
into what.
That would work.
But just with the concept, right?
Well, yeah, they come in and they say, no, this needs to be platted because, and then they might say, we'll give you the right of way. Now we're not platted. And
Okay.
then we say, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
At least that gives you another channel to work
So,
with.
yeah.
We may have language already that gives that ability to us to some degree. There's language that says that the court can,
Not allow plating.
I can't remember if it's in there all the way. I may be thinking of something.
I don't think it's in there, but I think we could add like something like that. Might be worthwhile.
I think we would certainly support that.
Where would you,
I don't know about y'all.
No, well, 232 has a chapter that says county does not, they can waive plating for any situation.
I think that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and that's it. But I think you need to have a rule. I mean, you don't want
Yeah.
No,
Some
yeah.
guidelines, sure.
well, where do you put that? In which of these
section,
sections?
the very beginning where the
The
exemptions
exemptions.
are.
Under the exemptions, probably.
Section,
But I like your idea of bringing a concept plat,
Section 1.
Charlie, to be able to let Charlie and whoever the commissioner is decide this one meets what John was talking about, it doesn't require plating, or you want to give a little right of way dedicated, let him do it at that time and not have to plat it.
Could you put that in 1013?
we just had a 3A.
I think you could probably
Yeah,
work
You
in
figure it out.
we'd add it in section 1 right up front. And I think it would just,
I'd be fine.
it's not gonna be done very often.
I'd be good with that.
Yeah.
Well, it might be if, you know.
Well, right now
know that
people
they can
are-
do that
You know,
without spending $5,000.
I don't know that it was $5,000 exactly, but.
Significant.
Probably 4.
Yeah.
Probably close.
All right.
Okay, almost. I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. Where we are is, we're going to forego the workshop on Wednesday because we worked through the whole subdivision rules and regulations today. And so we're going to get this to Chuck Kimbrough, and he's going to give us the final say back, and then we'll have our public hearing and final adoption. Are we going to run a dual track over here for the takings impact assessment?
I'll defer to Chuck on that, but as soon as he's comfortable that we're far enough along that we can start that, I'm all for getting that going too.
But I would say that is running dual tracks. We're trying to finalize the subdivision rules and regulations and do our
Takings impact
taking
at the
impact.
same time.
Yeah.
And then there will, I mean, and I'll give Charlie, there's a few, not wording changes at all, but moving things around a little bit to make it flow a little bit better. And then, yeah. What?
I made some notes from today that I'd like to visit with y'all about before we send it over to Chuck, so I can say specifically look at these sections for these issues and help us
Okay.
solve those problems.
So in the next couple of weeks, we'll get it to Chuck.
Okay, I think we're all on the same page. Good session, guys, gals.
Thank you.
We're adjourned.